A simple command echoed from the cabin speaker. Stay where you are, and then 304 people never returned to land. This wasn't a maritime accident. It was a ritualized burial orchestrated by greed, apathy, and systemic betrayal. When students called for help before the captain, when fishermen risked their lives while trained rescue forces stood still, when the government announced everyone has been rescued, even as hundreds of bodies sank into the sea, Sewol wasn't just a sinking ship. It was a mirror reflecting a society that chose pride over human lives, and the price was an entire generation buried in silence. Let us retrace every minute of that doomed voyage, where every cry for help was ignored, and justice came far too late to save anyone. The Sewol Ferry was living proof of the corruption of collective responsibility. The Sewol Ferry was a facade of pride masking structural greed. It wasn't built to protect lives, but to boost profit and reputation for those in control. The vessel had been modified, its upper levels raised by 51 centimeters, making it dangerously top-heavy. Yet no authority stopped it. No engineer spoke up. No regulator intervened. What does that say? That complicity had become institutionalized. The ship departed while carrying over double its legal load to 43 tons versus the allowed 987. To fit more cargo, they drained the ballast water, which is essential for balance. That wasn't just a violation of maritime standards, it was collusion with catastrophe. When every safety line looks the other way, disaster is no longer an accident. It's a schedule. The last-minute switch transferring 325 students from the Oham ship to the Sewol was chilling. No transparent reason was given. It looked like a setup. Why change ships at that crucial moment? Who made that call? No answers. But that decision turned hundreds of teenagers into victims. Not of nature, but of a system willing to gamble lives for convenience. A night of joy became the prologue to a mass burial ceremony. The first night aboard the Sewol was festive. Students sang, threw a surprise birthday party for their teacher, and watched fireworks from the deck. 2 Filipino singers performed. But beneath the laughter lurked an invisible shadow. As they made memories, hundreds of tons of excess cargo were shifting below deck. This wasn't a celebration. It was the opening act of a deadly script. Instead of prioritizing safety equipment, the ferry had a personal photo gallery installed for the company chairman. That wasn't negligence, it was a statement. Human lives ranked below vanity. Every decision on this ship whispered the same truth: when architecture bends to ego, disaster is just a question of when. And nobody cared. By morning, with calm seas and half the journey complete, students woke brimming with excitement. They had no idea that destiny was about to twist, not because of bad weather, but because of neglected regulations, ignored inspections, and a government asleep at the helm. Their joyous trip would become their final memory, because betrayal wore a uniform that morning. When a student calls for rescue before the captain, that's the loudest indictment. 8:48 a.m. The ship shook violently and tilted 30 degrees. Objects flew. Passengers screamed. Amid the chaos, 17-year-old Choi Deok-hwa called 119. He didn't panic. He calmly described the emergency. He became the first person to send a distress signal to land. A teenage boy did what the captain should have, and that fact alone exposes the truth. The captain remained silent. No emergency signal was sent. No radio alert. The teachers on board couldn't communicate clearly either. In contrast, Choi, just a student, held the line. When adults fail, the courage of a child becomes a mirror, exposing the failure of a system that was supposed to protect him. No words needed. Actions spoke. Loudly, the ferry's loudspeaker repeated a chilling order. Please stay in place, over and over. No evacuation guidance, no physical help, just a voice calm and firm, commanding submission. That wasn't a safety message. It was a death sentence. When you know the ship is sinking, yet you tell passengers to sit still, you've chosen death on their behalf. And the obedient students paid the price. Obedience didn't save lives. It just made death more organized. The students followed instructions. They lined up, wore life jackets, sat down and waited. They believed the adults would rescue them, believed the system wouldn't fail. But no one came. No one opened the doors. No one broke protocol. Their trust became the very rope that tethered them to their deaths. Obedience had always been a virtue until it became a silent killer. As the ship tilted past 60 degrees, students still stayed put. Some noticed water seeping in, but the speaker said, "Wait for further instructions." Some adults sensed danger, but didn't dare disobey. Everyone feared consequences. But who would have punished them? No one. And that's the deadliest lesson when authority is wrong and you still obey. You've written your own death warrant. Rescuers stood outside. They didn't enter, didn't break windows, didn't lead evacuations. They circled the ship like spectators at a sinking ritual. Nobody moved. Nobody intervened. While cabins filled with icy seawater, every minute of delay meant another soul lost. All it would have taken was one act of defiance to save dozens. But nobody broke the command, and that command killed them. If the one steering the ship escapes first, don't ask why the children didn't return. Captain Lee Jun-seok was the first to leave the ship. When Coast Guards arrived, he was wearing a tank top and shorts, stepping onto a rescue boat like a tourist dodging rain. He didn't send an SOS. He didn't lead an evacuation. He knew the ship wouldn't stabilize, but he didn't stay a second longer. That's not a mistake. That's betrayal. Not just the captain. The entire crew, except for 3 abandoned ship. Those 3 stayed to help the students and died doing so. Their bravery only highlighted the cowardice of the rest. Afterward, the government said, "We did everything we could." But who is we in that statement? If the leaders escape first, what leadership is left? Worse yet, even after the crew escaped, no one told passengers how to survive. While the cabins were flooding, students waited for guidance. The captain, instead of helping, stayed silent. Coast Guards prioritized rescuing crew over children. When lives are triaged by rank, when those who caused the tragedy are saved first, you don't need a storm, just cowardice to sink a ship. The people with the power to save chose instead to hold it back. After the accident, official rescue teams arrived, but none of them entered the ship. They said they were waiting for orders. They said they needed coordination, but coordination never came. Meanwhile, local fishermen, no badges, no rank, plunged into danger and saved hundreds. Their quiet courage forced the nation to ask, where did the national rescue budget go? Who are the real heroes and who are just salaried spectators? President Park Geun-hye disappeared for 7 hours after the tragedy. When she resurfaced, she asked, why is it hard to find the students? Weren't they wearing life jackets? That question revealed either cruel ignorance or willful detachment. While hundreds of parents were losing their children, the head of state was detached from reality. She wasn't incapable of helping. She simply chose not to. And that perhaps was the most invisible yet brutal crime. Professional divers said they weren't authorized. Civilians were blocked from entering. State media reported all students rescued, a blatant lie. Amid the chaos, only one thing was clear: the state stood aside. No rescue, no leadership, no accountability. They prioritized image over lives. That's why on the Sewol, the students didn't die from drowning. They died because their country had all the tools to save them, but lacked the will to use them. Truth was bent to protect reputation, not lives. Official reports claimed the ferry sank due to overload, lack of ballast water, and a sudden turn. But survivors heard a loud explosion before the ship tilted. Photos revealed unusual wear on the left anchor, raising suspicions it was deliberately dropped to tip the vessel. Some speculated a collision with a military submarine. The government denied all of it. But in the minds of the people, a new version of truth was born, and no press conference could erase it. The darkest theory claimed Sewol was a ritual sacrifice. The disaster's date eerily aligned with the death of cult leader Choi Tae-min, who promised reincarnation after 20 years. The number of victims, 304, was deemed symbolic. Links between the ferry company chairman and religious sects fed this belief. Whether true or not, the theory reflected how badly public trust had collapsed when people turned to myths to make sense of reality. A state unwilling to admit fault will reshape truth to fit its image. Sewol wasn't just a ferry accident. It was a portrait of a political culture that values optics over honesty, narrative over lives. When truth is buried to protect power, then the students didn't just drown. They were silenced by the very nation meant to honor them. A rotting corpse cannot close the case it created. Company chairman Yoo Byung-eun was wanted nationwide. Over 6,000 police officers were deployed. Months later, a badly decomposed body was found in a field claimed to be his. No cause of death, no witnesses, no CCTV. Just a dental match. For a nation demanding accountability, a decaying corpse could never close the book on a systemic tragedy. People didn't believe it because their trust had sunk with the ship. State media quickly declared DNA confirmed identity, but they offered no explanation for the missing ID, the lack of injury, or the silent timeline. A man running a nationwide business and religious empire simply vanished. Was he murdered to silence him? Or did he never die at all? For a case that rocked an entire country, that level of ambiguity was too convenient to be coincidence. Most importantly, a corpse can't stand trial. It can't testify. It can't apologize. That made it the perfect solution for anyone wanting to shut the case. But the people didn't forget. They didn't want revenge. They wanted answers. And when the man most responsible vanishes without testimony, without accountability, it isn't closure. It's the beginning of endless doubt. Justice doesn't come from verdicts. It comes from confronting the truth. Captain Lee Jun-sok received a life sentence for intentional murder. It was the harshest legal penalty possible. But for grieving families, it wasn't enough. South Korea hadn't carried out the death penalty since 1997. And yet for hundreds of parents, life imprisonment couldn't fill the void. They didn't ask for blood. They asked for acknowledgement, responsibility, and remorse, not rehearsed speeches. 15 other crew members received 1.5 to 12 years in prison. In total, 3 people were prosecuted. But no high-ranking government official was punished. Those who blocked rescue operations, spread false news, or oversaw the disaster's logistics kept their jobs. No firings, no resignations. This was justice on a leash, only punishing those at the bottom of the hierarchy. Citizens called it performance justice, a judiciary selecting scapegoats to pacify outrage. But such theater only deepened public cynicism. Survivors suffered lifelong trauma. Some never returned to school. Some took their own lives. Meanwhile, corporate executives signed new deals. Politicians shuffled seats, and society moved on as if no one had ever drowned at sea. Sewol wasn't just a sunken ship, it was a permanent national fracture. 2 years later, Danwon High held a special graduation ceremony. No students received diplomas, only empty chairs, framed photos, and white flowers. The surviving classmates read names aloud one by one, It wasn't a celebration. It was a memorial in broad daylight. Students became mourners for a stolen generation. In that moment, the nation realized Sewol didn't just take lives, it took away the future itself. The survivors returned to Jeju Island not for fun, but to complete a trip frozen in time. They brought flowers, took pictures, captured the ocean their friends never saw. The breeze, the sunlight, the waves. Everything was there except the laughter. A vacation turned into a vigil. These young people learned too early. Sometimes pain doesn't come from fate, but from the silence of those who could have spoken up. Today, when Koreans mention Sewol, they're not just talking about a maritime disaster. They're referring to a moral implosion, a trust betrayed, a ghost that still haunts the sea. When the wind blows over Jindo, the waves seem to echo, "Mom, I want to see you." That's not history. That's a wound the nation hasn't dared to stitch shut. Sewol has sunk. But if we learn nothing, another Tao ship will follow, and with it, another generation lost. Sewol sank. But worse than that, trust drowned with it. A nation with every resource imaginable, but no courage to save children screaming from inside flooded cabins. A system full of responsibility slogans. Yet when it collapsed, the only ones still waiting for orders were the students themselves. This wasn't a tragic anomaly. It was a living indictment of a state that valued image over innocence. And if society keeps choosing silence over accountability, then Sewol isn't the end of something. It is merely the first chapter of future betrayals we haven't yet named.